but I'm prepared to proceed. I am not a cat. I'm really stuck in two minds about this one, because in one mind I'm like, this really isn't it. I don't think anyone wants this, but at the same time, I have just today heard plenty of people who are saying they would happily take this over competing options, and I blame you all in the YouTube comments for getting me so confused. Would you take a webcam that does silky smooth, buttery smooth 60 FPS over one that has higher quality or better sharpness or whatever? That's essentially what AVerMedia is posing here today with their new webcam that they just released, which is the AVerMedia PW315, which is confusingly named with the numbers flipped from the PW513, which I just reviewed, which is a 4K webcam. This one is 1080p, 30 and 60 FPS, but it's USB 2.0. There's a lot going on with this. We're going to talk about it in today's video, right after a word from this video's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Nerd or Die and their iridescent stream package. If you want something that's minimal, clean, but also has a little bit of flair with the little sticker accents, Nerd or Die's latest stream package is the one for you. This one is really kind of slick, has light and dark themes, and has way more content and customization than even Nerd or Die's normal stream packages. So check them out in the link in the video description, or head over to eposvox.gg/nerdordie to learn more. I'm EposVox, the stream professor, and we are looking at the PW315 webcam from AVerMedia. This is their new USB 2.0 webcam, not 3.0, 2.0. They continue to keep releasing newer USB 2.0 products against all advice for some reason. But honestly, there's a little bit to be appreciative of with this webcam. This is a 1080p only webcam aimed at 1080p 60 FPS, mainly for game streams. That's literally the live stream camera, part of their line for that. But they are also launching today at a different price point, the PW310P, which is a slightly different webcam that comes in a little bit cheaper. If I pull up the prices here, we're looking at $79.99 for the 310P versus $119 for the PW513. And in between this sits their older webcam, the PW313, which I still haven't gotten around to reviewing and may not at this point, because it seems like they're launching on both sides of it, but we'll still cover it in the future. The PW310P is not one I have in hand. It's mainly aimed at personal video calls and things like that, not streaming, according to AVerMedia, and isn't as good. It's 1080p 30 only, and it's missing a lot of the features, which is why they're not sending it to me for a review. But I do have the 313 here, which is what you've been looking at. But I'm gonna go ahead and switch us over to the 4-way view that I have been doing since 2014, because you guys seem to like it a lot. Getting some specs out of the way, the PW315 supports 1080p up to 60 FPS, as I said, in JPEG only. This is a sort of pre-compressed motion JPEG, literally JPEG, video format, because it's only USB 2.0. I don't know why they went with only USB 2.0 other than some sense of compatibility, but I think that was a missed mark for a live streaming webcam. It seems like both with this and the Live Gamer Mini, they're just finding cheaper components that they can produce a product out of at a cheaper price point and claiming that it's going to be more compatible. I don't know if this is a realistic use case, given that everyone who can reasonably stream at 1080p 60 FPS in the year 2021 has USB 3.0 ports, at least, if not better. I had these back in 2010. It's been 11 years. It is once again a fixed focus camera versus autofocus. It has a 95-degree, nice wide field of view here. Compared to the AVerMedia PW513, it has a 94-degree field of view, so basically identical. But then it does support the EPTZ fancy features that I covered in my PW513 review, and I'm not going to bother covering here. One note, it supports Windows 7. So for this comparison, we have 4 cameras lined up here. The PW315, of course, the Logitech StreamCam in the top right, looking weirdly colored as hell, assuming I haven't color corrected all of this yet. The bottom left is the PW513, their USB 3.0 camera I just reviewed and then re-reviewed recently. And then the bottom right, just for kicks and giggles, I have my A7C, which is my main webcam. Just to give you a point of comparison. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. You can't beat this with a webcam, just to be clear. Right off the bat, to get complaints out of the way, all of these are on manual settings. As far as my lighting here goes, both the 513 and the 313 pretty much overexpose right away with, you know, big bright lights like this. Worse on the 315, however. The 513 has the auto brightness mode that I talked about in its review, and it handles and adjusts more appropriately for this, whereas the 315 just stays, I'll show a clip of it, but it just stays completely blown out, and I have a lot of trouble getting it toned back down. In fact, the brightness, gain, and exposure settings on these two cameras are worlds apart in terms of what settings they need to be at and how they're actually perform and things like that. So these are all set to manual settings, including the Logitech StreamCam. You will notice, however, of all the cameras, the Logitech StreamCam once again looks the worst. This was something that I noted in my review of it, was that I had a terrible time getting color to look properly, and that is still the case here. Now, all of these cameras, well, the webcams at least, have their own color problems, and all webcams introduce color problems by giving us only a white balance slider. The problem is white balance is determined by temperature and tint. There's no single number for that, which is why, especially with the Logitech cameras, when you go into manual white balance mode, you can never recreate what they create in the auto mode because you don't have access to all of the controls. No matter what I do to the hue, to the saturation, or to the white balance, I can't get me to look properly in the Logitech StreamCam, and never have. The Brio was just as bad, but at least looked a little bit more natural. In terms of color, of the webcams available, the 513, in my opinion, looks the most natural in terms of recreating my skin color and the colors around me. The 315, however, isn't too far behind when you look at it right now. However, in my sample clips, when I was doing my testing before I darkened my hair color, my hair was actually pink. It was originally bright pink, and then it faded super quick because I bought some bad hair dye that they immediately recalled as soon as I bought it. But it was more of like a strawberry blonde, and that is shown way over accentuated in the StreamCam clip. It's obvious in any video I can show you here of what I've shot with, and in the 513 you can kind of see a hint of the pink, but in the 315 I could not get that pink to show up at all. It was just treating me as a straight blonde, which is really bizarre. Colors on webcams have always been a problem, and of course, once you get them locked down to a manual setting and get them as close as you can use a little white balance card like this and try to manually white balance and get them adjusted to then apply, color grading in your video editor, make a LUT. I have a whole video on this. I'm gonna apply that as best of a rough, quick job I can do right now. So at worst, the StreamCam should look a little bit better, but the issue is getting the white balance right isn't even just difficult during live controls, but also during editing, because everything gets so out of whack that getting a proper white balance even in post with this is quite difficult. I'm gonna hold up a little color chart here so you can see how colors are recreated in the different cameras. Again, the StreamCam is just the worst for this. It also has a tighter field of view, as you can tell. The big takeaway for me about the 315 webcam is that it is the smoothest and easiest to operate 60 FPS motion camera that I have ever used. The colors may not be great. The sharpness is honestly terrible. Like if I pull it up full screen versus the other cameras here, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but I think in the 60 FPS mode, the Logitech StreamCam actually wins in terms of reasonable detail resolving here. In my shirt, the sharpness actually looks a little bit better in the two AVerMedia cameras in terms of the texture being rendered properly, but actually on my face, in part due to the focusing system, my face actually looks the cleanest and most realistically sharp in the Logitech StreamCam because it has autofocus. I can get right up on it, you can get the focus in all of my facial hair right here. The two AVerMedia cameras are fixed focus, which I consider to be a good thing in some ways because the Logitech camera autofocus goes from on top of the camera to about here-ish. This is like the plane of focus, and then you get infinity focus for everything else. Whereas the fixed focus lenses, you don't even have the option of getting close on it to be in focus. However, that's not the only problem. I still believe that the 513 webcam, and even more so now, for its 1080p 60 mode, is somehow using a lower resolution or something isn't working right to resolve the data, or the visual data, because it is just so soft. It's so weirdly soft, and if you crank up sharpening in post, it looks weird. I believe the 315, the new webcam, actually has a little bit more detail natively captured here, but it's being kind of crunched in the MJPEG, and it does look like there's some post sharpening applied, even when I have sharpening turned all the way down in AVerMedia's CamEngine software. So it looks super crunchy and noisy on a lot of small details and for the visual noise in the background. And so that is kind of disappointing. So that's kind of what I meant in the intro, in that this isn't the cleanest presentation of a webcam. It's not the nicest looking webcam, but frame rate wise, this has been the most stable webcam I have used. And this is because of a couple factors. One being that it's USB 2.0. It's doing MJPEG encoding all on the camera without any, any USB bandwidth limitations or whatever. It's sticking within the USB 2.0 bandwidth, and it's doing it efficiently and effectively, which most webcams do not do, but it also comes down to the exposure settings. As much as I complained about them, it leans towards overexposing, and I almost feel like this was an intentional decision made to keep 60 FPS smooth, because on the Logitech cameras, this has been a, common issue going back across most of the cameras, but it's been a big issue where you start messing with exposure and you get all sorts of weird ghostiness and all sorts of that. I get a little bit of that here on the AVerMedia PW513 as well, which is the USB 3.0 camera. I mentioned in that review that the 60 FPS mode was just garbage, don't use it. The 60 FPS mode in this new PW315 camera is phenomenal. It is silky smooth, no ghosting, no exposure issues in that regard. Like, it is the best 60 FPS webcam I've ever used in terms of frame rate. But that's all it has going for it. Real quick, just a note on the CamEngine software. Again, it comes if you use the full version of the software versus the light version, which is available on Windows and Mac. The full version, which is Windows only, gives you EPTZ stuff, face tracking stuff, all this weird stuff. The light version just gives you full manual control over the webcam, and you can control brightness, exposure, gain, sharpness, hue, saturation, all of that. Control it really, really well, and you can save profiles that are loaded upon startup, which has been a long-term Logitech problem, is that when you reboot your computer, because most of your settings are done through the UVC controls in OBS and not on the camera somehow, your settings are lost. This gives you full direct access to that in a profile that saves a past reboot, which is pretty nice. Physically, it looks just like the PW513, just a little shorter and smaller. It includes a pre-attached USB cable, which I cannot stand. Both the PW315 and the Logitech StreamCam have way too short of a cable to be really usable for anyone but laptop users, and that just makes me mad. Whereas the PW513 has a detachable USB-C cable. I can't imagine why that adds enough significant cost, especially for a USB 2.0 camera, to have a detachable cable, but apparently it does. The 315 also has a privacy shutter, although it's a little janky to use, just like the 513. This is really awkward because literally the day I am recording this video, which is a couple days before the embargo of this camera goes up, Razer just announced their new Kiyo Pro, which originally I wasn't sure about because their product page says uncompressed video, and then their specs for that product page say H.264, and I was like, oh, here we go again. But no, I've since been confirmed by someone else who's already had it and tested it, who's like a Razer partner or something, that it's running in NV12 or YUY2, which beats out all of the cameras presented in front of you except for the mirrorless camera here, because they're all MJPEG for 1080p 60. Actually, that's not true. The 513 is UIVY, which is essentially YUY2 for 1080p 60. But both the StreamCam, the Logitech Brio, and the new 315 from AVerMedia is, of course, MJPEG only because it's USB 2.0. The product page did list YUY2, but that's only for 640 by 480 at 30 FPS, so have fun with that. So I wasn't too stoked on the Razer Kiyo Pro originally because the original Kiyo was not a great camera IMO, and my personal unit, the ring light on it, died after like 6 months. It was not a great time, and otherwise it was basically a C920 clone IMO with Razer's terrible software and just not good recreation. But the new one is looking pretty exciting. It is 1080p 60 or 1080p 30 with this new HDR stuff, which appears to work even with barely any light, and it apparently has actual uncompressed modes. So I would say if you're looking at this webcam because you really want the smooth 60 FPS, wait like 2 weeks until I can get my hands on the review sample for the Razer Kiyo Pro, compare it to that, and make your decision from there. Price will be a factor, however, as the 315 is $119, whereas the Kiyo Pro is $200, like the StreamCam was and the Brio was. So tough decision there. The 315, at least new, is certainly cheaper than most of the competing options, but it's gonna be a tough call. I'm still gonna maintain my stance that I don't think webcams need 60 frames per second. You could argue that every camera needs every frame rate as an option just to give you control, but realistically for streamers, and especially for YouTube video makers, your face cam does not need to be 60 frames per second. Most people will not notice the difference, especially in a small corner of your game while you're game streaming, whether your face, especially if you're gaming, like you're not moving your face a whole heck of a lot. They're not gonna notice if your lips are moving at a proper 60 frames per second versus 30 when they're mainly looking at your game anyway. And when it is full screen, 30 FPS still provides a perfectly smooth experience. And the reason I say that is because there's sacrifices on virtually every webcam to make 60 FPS happen, because it requires 1.5 stops more light to get the same exposure, roughly, as 30 frames per second, which on tiny webcam sensors, which are already starved for light in the first place and having trouble processing the data that fast, you get into messes like all the exposure troubles I've talked about and the like. And other cameras typically perform better in 1080p 30. I do think this camera looks a little better in 1080p 30 than 60, not by much, but at least on like the PW513, you get much cleaner and more detailed image at 30 FPS than 60, as I've mentioned in both of my reviews on it. I think most of the Logitech cameras look better at 30 FPS, where they get that uncompressed mode, the Brio and the StreamCam, and the new Razer camera gets the new HDR kind of functionality at 30 FPS that it doesn't get at 60. So just my take, but I would say this is a carrot on a stick you don't need to waste your time chasing. I wanted to wrap up today's video by mentioning that, of course, all of this was done with a dark background, because these webcams really do not perform well when you have bright backlights along with your key lights, which is something that Razer camera is actually supposed to kind of help with. But I'm gonna now demo it with all of my overhead lights turned on, which are gonna be a different color temperature and mess with color a little bit, but brighten up the background and show you what that looks like. Mess aside, as we're going through and getting rid of a bunch of stuff and clearing out my storage to finalize the studio here, here's what you got. They're performing a little bit better now on auto. They were just not handling this at all. But you certainly will see, I think this was one of the complaints that came up when where I had to re-review the PW513, because a lot of people were like, this is way noisier than you showed. I think this is one of those complaints, in that my background here now reveals a lot more bright areas that noise can show up, whereas having everything super dark, the noise kind of blended in with it. So I thought it was only fair to show this, even though this is realistically not how you should have a webcam shot in most scenarios, but there are situations where you want to do it. Hope you enjoyed today's webcam review. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe for more tech education and stream guides. Come join our Discord over at discord.gg/EposVox. If you enjoy live streams and want more resources for your streams, we offer freebies in there, and we have a huge new launch coming over the next couple months that we've already started teasing to select members of our server that you are not going to want to miss out, especially if you're into my kind of style of things and things like that. I'll leave it at that. Hit the like button, subscribe, follow me on TikTok. I'll see you next time.